Joining me now, our first panel, Liberal MP Katie Allen and Labor MP Amanda Rishworth here in the studio with me. Thanks both for your time.
Thank you, Tom.
Let's start on education. We've got more and more money being spent and results getting worse. So it's not about the money?
Well, of course it's about resources. Resources are part of it, but of course we've seen no plan from this government. They've been in for over 6 years and no plan about how to improve standards. Of course it comes down to resources, teacher quality, and when this government came into office they ripped up the school improvement plans. They were plans that each school set out how they were going to drive change and improvement in the schools. Christopher Pyne labelled it red tape when he was Education Minister. So that's the problem we've got.
Just on resources though, if you compare our spending to other countries, resources in terms of funding, we don't have an issue with that. That's not what's driving these results, right? Should the conversation be more about other elements, not just funding?
Well, we should be talking about resources, we should be talking about quality, we should be talking about teacher quality. What I find really interesting from this minister, though, is he refuses to take responsibility. He blames the states and territories. He reads out his talking points. His only plan for education he's announced is banning mobile phones from the classroom.
It is up to states to deliver the education, though. It's their responsibility.
But of course, it's about a partnership, Tom. It's about the Commonwealth, who invests money into education, actually talking with the states about how we drive quality improvement. And that's, for example, what the school improvement plans are about. But as I said, Christopher Pyne ripped those up, calling them red tape.
One of the things the minister said was, well, let's focus on the system, not about funding. Couldn't all the ministers have been focusing on the system? Are they saying they weren't focused on that enough?
So, Tom, I think the Minister outlined very well in question time today that we've had one of the biggest investments. And as you quite rightly said, we don't need more money. We just need to actually get the outcomes we want. And we're actually enforcing the Gonski reforms. And next week there is the Educational Council coming together as part of COAG. And Dan Tehan, the Minister for Education, is working very hard to look at the aspects of, how do we step up with regards to having an impact on outcomes. And we do know from things like NAPLAN that we've been, as a country, focusing on equity rather than excellence. And
so did the coalition, when you say that, did the coalition get bogged down in this? Because been in power since 2013 and now we're talking about, let's really focus on the system here. Did you get bogged down in that and maybe partly a result of the reduced funding of the 2014 budget and that set us back a few years?
Well, I think at the end of the day you need to invest in education. It's such an important thing. It's basically what gets our country going, is educating the next generation, making sure they're ready for the jobs of the future. There's a lot of change that's going on in education. What we want to see is back to basics. We want to see an introduction or a real sort of focus on phonics, and we want to see a decluttering of the curriculum. And that takes time and it takes partnership. And I know that Dan is working very hard, the Minister for Education is working very hard to get an agreement with all the states and territories, and in fact he's got them all together next week, coming together, and that's very important for part of that
One
journey.
aspect that does have money attached to it is teacher pay. Teacher quality has a big impact on students. Is that something that could be looked at? You look at Japan, where they get a lot more money, for example. Well,
when I've talked to teachers, and I've been chair of a school and I've been involved in the education sector, I hear from people that the reason that they do teaching is because they want to make a difference and they care about making a difference.
They're the teachers in there, but isn't it about...
Of course, everyone would like to have more income and more...
Right.
But what I hear from them is what they would like is more development of their career.
But isn't the point about getting the very best people? I'm not casting aspersions on the teachers you were talking to, but it's about getting the best and brightest into teaching. So by necessity, if the pay is lower, you weren't talking about people like that because they were off getting a better wage as maybe a lawyer or an accountant.
Well, I think there's two aspects here. I think there are people who are attracted to the profession because they love what they're doing, and we know that teachers, I think, could do better with more pay. But they're two separate things. People are not necessarily attracted to a job.
Extra pay, what does that mean? That the government might need a bit more money?
Well, I think the most important thing is I don't think the outcomes are directly related to teacher pay. What I think they're related to is the quality of the curriculum and the quality of helping teachers to provide the best outcomes and focusing on numeracy and literacy.
Do you think teacher pay has an impact?
Well, I think teacher quality and attracting the best and the brightest is a problem in this country. I think
is pay a factor?
I think pay is a factor, as well as a range of other things. And I think we need to respect and recognise our teaching profession a lot more than we do in this country.
Okay, so on that, because would that be somewhere Labor might go next and say, we're spending quite a bit on the broad education spectrum. We want to have an extra pledge specifically on teacher pay.
Well, what we've said is that teacher quality makes a difference, and we want to make sure that we're attracting the best and brightest. And I think lifting the profession and the way the public and indeed politicians see the teaching profession. I've been disappointed at some of the members of Parliament who have talked down the teaching profession. I want to see our teachers really be invested in to improve teacher quality, and that's part of the conversation. But of course, we need to make sure that we're open to that conversation, that we're driving that, not just, as Dan Tehan does, blame the states and territories.